Καλό απόγευμα από το στούντιο του ΡΙΚ, όπου σήμερα φιλοξενούμε στην πρώτη του τηλεοπτική συνέντευξη στην Κύπρο τον Διευθύνοντα Σύμβουλο της Τράπεζας Κύπρου, John Patrick Hourican. Mr. Hourican, welcome to the studio.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
After nearly 20 months in Cyprus, actually 17 to 18 months, before going through, let's say, difficult parts of the interview, how is life in Cyprus?
It's busy. The Cypriot people have been very welcoming to me. I enjoy the company of all my colleagues and everyone I meet here. We have some good fun. But really, it's just been a busy time. We have been, and the family is here. It's great fun, and they enjoy Cyprus and the weather. But apart from that, it's work. I mean, I see my job and time in Cyprus really as devoting my time to repairing the bank.
You have 4 children, and all are staying with you here in Cyprus?
No, they're all at school in Ireland, and they come for the summer, so they'll be here for June, July and August. They'll be here for Easter. But no, we haven't destabilized their schooling by moving them to Cyprus.
And do you feel safe and happy in Cyprus? And you know what I mean.
There have been a few moments where the Cypriot population has been less than welcoming, in the sense of the protests at our AGM, and indeed the setting fire to my car outside the house. These are unfortunate incidents, but I don't feel unsafe. I think these are people sending messages, and I understand their anger about what happened in Cyprus. I just hope that they are sending it to the institution and not to me as an individual.
Do you face some of these angry people during your social meetings, for example? Did they tell you something? Do you answer to them?
Look, the one thing I try and do is deal in the truth, and the truth of the circumstances in Cyprus are difficult. People lost their money, equity holders lost their money, bond holders lost their money, and some depositors lost large chunks of their savings. So it would be unreasonable for me not to understand and empathize with these people. But indeed, the bank is now owned by its depositors. And then we brought some new investors into Cyprus, and now they are also co-owners of the bank. And my job is to try and make their investment valuable, and therefore try and return some of the value destroyed for the depositors in doing a good job at the bank. But when I meet people in the street or in a restaurant or wherever, I generally receive very reasonable comments from them, and most people face to face in individual circumstances are very respectful of the job we're trying to do. But of course I understand and are empathetic with people who had hardship.
For how long will you stay here? I have read somewhere that John Hourican will leave BOC as soon as he stabilizes the bank, and that your major aim here is to include this stabilization in your CV, and I'm not implying that this is a but.
So since I've arrived here, I think virtually since I arrived, people have been saying I'm leaving, and I'm here almost a year and a half later. So look, I don't have any current plans to go anywhere. My job is still to do the job at the bank, and that remains my intention. So we are fixing this bank, trying to do what's right. We will know when it's time to go, when it's time to go. But of course I'm not a permanent feature in Cyprus. I'm from Ireland. I'm in Cyprus to do the job of fixing the bank and repairing it. Once I believe that that is done and that the bank is in good shape, then of course I will consider what to do next.
From 3 to 5 years, as I've read.
I signed a 3-year contract when I joined the bank, and that's a year and a half ago, and we'll see after that. I mean, the board will decide whether I'm doing a good job, whether I should stay, and indeed, I will form my own view. But at this moment in time, I'm planning to be here and to do the job.
Going back to the past for a few minutes, do you think that our political leaders in 2013 could have done better at Eurogroup? For example, could they have demanded a better treatment for Bank of Cyprus, not a bail-in for your depositors, not taking over Laiki, for example?
I'm not a great student of the detail of what happened in March 2013, but at a macro level, Cyprus feels to me to have been poorly treated by reference to the treatment that other nations in Europe got when they ran into difficulty. And indeed that was, to my mind, amplified by, for example, in July last year when Banco Espírito Santo in Portugal ran into difficulty. It was bailed out. The depositors were not bailed in. And this was subsequent to the Cyprus bailout. So I think there are reasons for Cyprus as a nation to feel hard done by what occurred in March 2013. But on a superficial read of what occurred, I think that perhaps at the time Cyprus didn't do itself through the various discussions that were ongoing with Europe a lot of good either in terms of the procrastination and the inability to put something in place quickly. But again, it's an uneducated view. I came and it was already done, and our job is to repair it. But I do think people in Cyprus have a reason to feel a little unhappy about what happened.
People of Cyprus only in general, or depositors of Bank of Cyprus
I think
mainly?
So there was no other institution in Europe where depositors were asked to carry the cost of the failure of the bank. It was not, they were effectively nationalized as problems across the rest of Europe. So I do think that the depositors of the Bank of Cyprus, and indeed like eBank, have reason to be unhappy.
A lot of talk is being made, I don't know if you are reading it in the papers, about the decision to sell, to give actually, some people say, Bank of Cyprus's branches in Greece to Piraeus Bank in Greece. What's your comment?
Well, I haven't done a great degree of analysis on it, and I think there is some confusion as to whether it was a good deal or a bad deal. And indeed, the way Piraeus accounted for the branches when they were acquired by writing them up by more than 3 billion euros in value seemed like an odd thing, certainly from my perspective, for them to do. I think today, not having a Greek operation in Cyprus attached to a Cyprus bank is an unintended positive consequence of the Eurogroup 2013 actions, because today Greece is looking economically dangerous and politically sort of very, very far left of centre, and Cyprus can actually stand today and say we are economically separate, we are the eastern gateway to the European Union, and this country will stand irrespective of what might happen or might not happen in Greece. So of course, again, it's one of those things, again, it was done before I got here. There are question marks as to whether it was a good idea. Today, not having a Greek operation is a significant positive for Cyprus.
But I have read somewhere, I think in Financial Times, that Bank of Cyprus has still a small exposure to Greece equal to less than 2% of assets. Is this accurate?
Yeah, so when in the separation there were little bits of things left over. So we have 600 properties still left over in Greece. We have some guarantees which didn't move with the loans. We have a variety of what I would call a hodgepodge of things that got left over in a chaotic separation. And we are gradually reducing that risk, and it does not present a risk to our capital at this point in time, which is very important.
So you are expecting Greek depositors to come to Cyprus as a safe haven?
We would certainly welcome Greek depositors in Cyprus. The bank, as you know, is capitalised now to one of the better levels of capitalisation across Europe. That's not because we have been just creating more capital for the sake of it. We also have a lot of risk, which I'm sure we'll talk about. But I think the bank is a very good place now for people to put their money and for us to mind it for them. And of course we would encourage all Greek depositors who have some concerns about their own banking system to come to the Bank of Cyprus, where we believe we have a bank that is well capitalised and capable of minding their money in a way perhaps we weren't able to mind it in the past.
And if I could ask for a prediction from a top banker about what will be the most possible outcome of the crisis in Greece?
I think it's dangerous for us to comment on outcomes. I think the outcome will be a deeply political outcome. Whether Greece economically should be or should have ever joined the euro is a matter of academic debate. The fact is that Greece is in the euro today. Greece's programme of austerity had been making some progress, and we were beginning to see the turn in the actions from government. But the population of Greece, it seems, decided that it had run out of time in the conversation with its politicians, and it has elected a more left-wing and a more aggressive government with stance. I think the answer will be political. The economics of Greece look very challenging. but Greece cannot be forced out of the euro. Greece would have to choose to leave, and that would be a people's decision in Greece.
Can I come back and ask if the decision on Cyprus was a deeply political outcome, or on Cyprus was it something else?
Well, again, I'm only guessing, but it would certainly, in all decisions at the Eurogroup level are fundamentally political. Cyprus has an economy with a GDP at the time of somewhere in the order of 17 billion. The European Union could have afforded to direct more funds at Cyprus to help it, and it chose not to. It chose to put the pain on the Cypriot people through the bailing in of their deposits. So it is by nature a political decision.
Some academics in Cyprus, coming back to Greece, suggest that capital controls should be imposed in Greece the soonest.
Well, again, I haven't studied the economics of it, so I can't comment properly on it. But the capital controls that were put in place in Cyprus were effective in helping stabilize the perimeters of the banking system. We've lifted them all. All domestic capital controls were lifted at the end of May last year. And indeed, now with the gate on international capital controls widened to €1 million a month, they are all but lifted. And I would expect that the government will lift the remaining capital controls in Cyprus very soon. That gives you a good indicator of whether capital controls can be effectively deployed in a country. So it is certainly a tool that can be used to stabilize Greece, and it is certainly one that should be considered seriously.
So coming back to Cyprus, you seem to be at war with our politicians. I think you actually repeated yesterday, your interview to Financial Times, that the links between business, politics and banking in Cyprus need to be broken. Can you elaborate a bit more on this?
So when I'm not at war with politicians, I am not a politician, and in fact I find it uncomfortable to be commenting on anything to do with the legislature or indeed anything to do with the political agenda. My job is to fix the bank. But part of fixing the bank is ensuring that we have in place a good framework to allow the bank to serve the economy well. And I have to say that the debate over the foreclosure law and insolvency framework that's being put in place has been, difficult to watch, because we were supposed to put it in place in August last year, and it really isn't still in place. And that has caused us some difficulty in discussing with investors, some difficulty in discussing with potential new bond markets transactions they might wish to do, and it makes Cyprus look less credible in the eyes of the international investor community, whom we deeply need as a country to invest in this nation to make sure we get it prosperous. So my debate is all around that. It's not about anything else. I would like to see a proper foreclosure and insolvency law put in place so that I can do my best to recover for our depositors the money that has not been paid back by people who are obliged to do so.
I'll insist a bit on this. Lots of people in Cyprus, or journalists actually, think that your bank prepared this list of loans of politically exposed persons that Mrs. Yorkachi had in order to blackmail our MPs when you were invited to talk at the House Ethics Committee.
This is total nonsense. And let me be really clear on that. We're obliged by regulation, both European regulation and Cyprus regulation, to deploy higher approval standards and higher standards of scrutiny on what is described as politically exposed persons or their associates or things that aggregate to them because of their interest in it. So it is part of the overall and proper prudential management of the bank that we look at politically exposed persons. And
you have a lot of lists.
Well, no, of course there are, but if we didn't have the list, you'd accuse us of not managing the bank. So of course we have a lot of information about so-called politically exposed persons. But a politically exposed person is anyone from running a state enterprise to running a government department to being a member of parliament to their families to companies they're directors of, and they all add up to a list. Now it is the case that of course if you're going to engage with people that you should know the facts around the circumstances you find yourself in. So we did want to be reviewing our politically exposed persons lists, and it was the case we had a list with MPs, as you'd expect us to, and it was the case that the central bank asked for a copy of the list. But the list of course had been prepared by us in the normal course of managing our business and the risks in it. The suggestion that we would use any customer information to blackmail anyone is complete and utter nonsense, and is something that I've never been trained to do and never would allow anyone in our bank to do. So I would refute aggressively any suggestion that that was the intention of preparing a list.
But this list was asked by Mrs. Hourican?
Well, the list was prepared in the normal course of risk management inside the bank. The fact that the list exists was mentioned in some newspaper, but of course a list of anything can exist. And it was the case that the central bank asked to see a copy of the list, and we provided it, as we should. They're our regulator.
Leaving the politicians and dealing with our business leaders, allow me to say that when I'm reading the list of your top debtors, I'm wondering if you have healthy businesses in Cyprus, or if a big part of our private sector economy was built actually on the sand of non-performing loans.
There is some truth in that. When you combine the two largest banks into a single institution, and both those banks were the providers of credit to corporate Cyprus, you get to see the whole economy effectively, or a large chunk of it, warehoused in the Bank of Cyprus. I would characterize Cyprus's larger businesses as having two constituencies. They have businesses that actually operate and employ people and require capital, and they suffer the normal stress that businesses suffer in a recession. But then most of these businesses, or a lot of them, also have what I would describe as vanity projects, or projects which are, development related, land related, the obsession of large businesses in Cyprus to grow and develop property based projects. And those projects tended to be financed with future sales in mind. But of course, as future sales begin to disappear from your horizon, those projects become quickly in difficulty. So you have to look at each of these businesses as the businesses that actually operate and serve the economy through normal business, and then the construction-related and property-related businesses which tended to have the wrong type of finance against them, or the recession caused their ability to get delivered to disappear. And they're businesses in their own right. We look at every single one of them separately, and we try and make sure we separate the viable businesses that employ people on the island from those businesses or projects that really are just stuck for a point in time. I think Cyprus has some very viable businesses, but I think in the third year of recession, like all businesses, they will be suffering the consequences of a contraction in the economy. There are good businesses and bad businesses in the large list, but I think on average Cyprus still has a good level of basic businesses to support its economy, and indeed to employ its people, which is an important part.
Do you believe that wealthy people have big deposits outside Cyprus?
Everyone says it, but nobody can prove it. So the anecdotal evidence would suggest that there are some levels of strategic default at the larger end, but also at the smaller end. And we run some statistical models inside the bank to see the pattern of behavior of businesses and people. What do we think might be the level of strategic default? Is this great word that everyone uses? And we think it's somewhere in the region of 15 to 20% of those who are in an non-performing category might be in a category of strategic default. But I can't prove it, and I can only operate in the law, and I can only work with the facts that I have. And indeed, what we need is the tools to go after those who are not paying us, so that we can get the money back for our depositors.
So I have read in your recent interview in the Financial Times that about 500 employees of Bank of Cyprus are working in your restructuring and recovering division. Cyprus's borrowing interest rate is now low, perhaps the lowest for decades, but still more than 50% of your loans are non-performing. Do we have to put the blame on the Parliament?
No, look, no one is specifically to blame for anything. The circumstances we find ourselves in Cyprus is that I think the banking sector had some practices which have come home to roost, which is we relied excessively on collateral, and we did not look enough at the cash repayment capability of businesses and individuals we lent to. So that's the first mistake. The second issue, of course, is economic, where the economy of the country has suffered a contraction, and that manifests itself in people's ability to repay. And then, of course, thirdly, you have to be able to enforce security. So you have to be able to go after loans, and you have to be able to use the law to morally persuade people that it is their obligation and they need to meet it. It's the combination of all of those three things. It's not one individual thing, and I wouldn't blame Parliament, but I would encourage Parliament to please put in place the basis of the moral hazard between a lender and a borrower, recognising that the lender is actually the depositors of the country to the borrowers of the country. And the equity, so when I lend 100 euros, I'm lending 14 euros of equity capital, the owners of the bank, and the rest is coming from depositors. So when you don't repay your loan, you're offending 86% of that offence is to the depositors and the rest is to the equity holders.
So, in your famous or infamous leaked internal email, you are saying that someone needs, like you are doing perhaps now, to start explaining the numbers more forcefully to the politicians or the people, in hope that they will understand that the possibility of mass foreclosures is a product of their imagination. Who should explain and why they don't understand?
Well, I'm sure they fully understand, but the suggestion that the bank will mass foreclose on vulnerable people's homes is complete nonsense. The bank has no intention of foreclosing on vulnerable groups, and I'll take you back as to why. So we lend money to people when they are economically capable of repaying us. That is the normal banking. When they run into difficulty, we have both an obligation and it is a good business practice for us to behave well for them. The idea that if someone gets into trouble and we would go after and take their home, or do that for lots of people, would be economically stupid for the bank to do it, and it would be societally stupid because it would damage our reputation and brand. If you look at the unemployed people who have loans with us today and who have mortgages, we've restructured 51% of those loans already to try and help them. So we are actually doing things to help vulnerable economic groups at this moment in their careers, in their lives, and we have no intention of being disruptive to that cohort of society. But equally, I think it's very important that, if someone is misbehaving and they are basically not cooperating with the bank at all, we must have a law and a legal system that allows us to enforce our rights to recover our depositors' money.
Paper today, Philadelphians, writes that people started giving up houses and their property just for restructuring their loans. Is it correct?
We had one set of keys. I mean, you cannot generalize from one example in one branch in Limassol. This would be somewhat foolish. We don't want people's houses. We want them to repay the obligations they've taken on, which is we need to figure out how over time they meet their financial obligations, which is they repay their debts. This is the key discussion for Cyprus. Greece is in the mid-30s in terms of non-performing loans. Cyprus is above 50%. We have a societal issue where 1 in 2 euros borrowed is in arrears of some form, and 1 in 4 borrowers is in arrears of some form. This is a problem for society as a whole, and it will cause us to have a drag on creating the foundations to drive prosperity into the future. So I'm keen that we address the real issue, which is not the discussion about the primary residence and the discussion about the sort of mass foreclosures. It's about the basic foundations of good law, so that we can take people's savings and allow people to consume them by buying capital goods and paying for them over time. That's the bank's job. But actually, the banking sector in Cyprus has failed miserably in making sure that that occurred, and we have to fix it.
In going to the foundations of our economy, are these tourism and natural gas instead of banks and the business sector?
It's all intertwined. So if you look at Cyprus's GDP and disaggregate it, I mean, you have of course tourism is an important part of it, you've got business services is an important part of it, you've got some agriculture, some medical, and all the other services that you'd expect across an economy. What we need to do is actually make sure we start talking about the economy and growing it, and start talking about how the bank can serve that economy.
And you are feeling that nobody's talking about this at the moment in Cyprus?
Individually, when I meet anyone in Cyprus, we talk about it. But I feel that the conversation in the media and the conversation across the newspapers is very myopic. We tend to be focused on small things in the past or matters of great detail today, when actually I think what we really need to talk about is how do we drive our way out of this. And let me give you just some example of that. So the world economy, I'm going to take it all the way up to the world economy for a second. On the last report I read from McKinsey's in the late part of last year, the world is borrowed to a tune of $199 trillion. And the debt in the world during the crisis, and the crisis started in 2007, it started later for Cyprus, the debt in the world grew by 27 trillion during that 7 years. $27 trillion, which is almost the same as 27 trillion euros now. 27 trillion of that is government debt. And when you look at the top 10 economies in the world, they are all the governments are effectively borrowed at or above 100% of GDP. So Cyprus is not in bad company when you start there. Household debt in Cyprus is a little bit higher than other countries, but China has quadrupled its debt in the last 7 years. America has grown its debt to 270% of GDP. Cyprus has the unique possibility of being able to grow its GDP to resolve its problem. Very few other economies in the world have that. So I think the debate that we need to have in Cyprus, which I know that lots of people are trying to have and starting to have, but we need to have it, is what are we going to do to set a 5-10-year plan to grow this economy so we create prosperity for the people in it, and we try and avoid the scourge of emigration, and we try and get more people onto the island, and we do all of those things. Now, I don't have all the answers. I have some ideas. There are hundreds of people, thousands of people across Cyprus who have great ideas, and I think we just need to move the debate on. One of the mistakes we made in Greece was that the austerity conversation went on for too long, and people lost hope for themselves and their kids. And I think that Cyprus has recovered very well. I think the government has done an excellent job in fiscal contraction and in putting in place the basics of what needed to get done. And I think that they should be applauded for that. And I would just encourage them now that as we put that foundation in place, we now learn the lesson from around us in Europe, and we start to talk about how we build an economy over the course of the next decade.
And now at the end, I'll read to you a comment which was written on the internet after you're talking to Cyprus Weekly at the weekend. They wrote that most of the people in authority, I'm reading it, in Cyprus have little or no experience of the outside world. It is a closed shop, relatives of relatives. Cyprus needs more people like Hourican from outside Cyprus who have experience. The authorities in Cyprus cannot even agree amongst themselves. They need to wake up to the fact they are a small island in a big world. Everyone in Cyprus is only interested in themselves. The last comment.
That feels very unfair to Cypriots. I work with some amazing people, and I engage with some amazing people across government, journalism, and of course general society. And I think the ideas are here. We just need to be willing and brave enough to have the conversation. Experience comes from lots of different ways. I'm not experienced in Cyprus, so I rely on those people around me to make sure I don't make mistakes in the job I do in Cyprus. I am experienced in the global world because my jobs have taken me in that space. But it's a combination of those two things that will create the future for Cyprus, not one or the other. So, of course, you need some external help, but I think there's enough brains in the country, and there's enough capability in all segments of society here for us to actually create a really bright future for Cyprus.
Thank you very much. Κυρίες και κύριοι, ήταν η συνέντευξη στο ΡΙΚ του Διευθύνοντος Συμβούλου της Τράπεζας Κύπρου, John Hourican. Καλό απόγευμα.